There's something really strange happening underneath the surface of the Testaments right now, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. Because after Episode 8, the series quietly planted the seeds for what might become the most unexpected storyline in the entire show. Not just another rebellion plot, not just another escape from Gilead arc, but something much messier, riskier, and honestly more emotional than I think viewers were expecting. And it all revolves around Agnes, Garth, and Becka. At first glance, it just looks like a painful love triangle. Agnes clearly loves Garth. Garth clearly cares about Agnes. Meanwhile, Becka, Agnes's closest friend, is now suddenly the girl being prepared to marry him instead. That alone already feels tragic enough. But the deeper you look into Episode 8, the more it starts to feel like the show is setting up something much bigger than heartbreak. Because what if this marriage arrangement isn't actually the endgame? What if it's the setup? And what if Garth, Becka, and Agnes are slowly becoming part of the same escape plan? The more I think about it, the more this theory honestly makes terrifying sense. Because the Testaments has been quietly showing us something important about Garth from the very beginning. He doesn't behave like a normal guardian. He doesn't think like one either. Even before Episode 8 outright confirmed his connection to Mayday, there was always this feeling that Garth was playing a role. Every conversation he had with Agnes felt genuine, but also careful, controlled, like someone constantly balancing two identities at once. And now we know why. Garth isn't just surviving inside Gilead. He's working against it. That changes everything about the way we should view his relationship with Agnes. Because suddenly, all those softer moments between them stop feeling like simple romance scenes and start feeling dangerous. Not dangerous because Gilead forbids love, although it does, but dangerous because genuine emotional attachment is exactly the kind of thing that can destroy undercover operations. And yet Garth keeps getting emotionally closer to Agnes anyway. That matters, especially because Episode 8 could have easily pushed Agnes and Garth completely apart once Becka entered the picture. But it didn't. Instead, the episode made the situation more emotionally complicated. Almost intentionally so, because even while Becca's engagement becomes official, the emotional center of the storyline still keeps drifting back toward Agnes and Garth. The lingering looks, the awkward silences, the sadness in Agnes's narration, the dream sequences, none of that felt accidental. The show wants us to feel like something unfinished still exists between them. And honestly, that's where this theory starts becoming really interesting. Because if Garth is secretly Mayday, then his marriage isn't just personal anymore. It's strategic. Gilead marriages are about control, power, lineage, alliances. But for someone inside Mayday, marriage also becomes access. Access to homes, access to commanders, access to information, access to movement, and more importantly, access to vulnerable girls trapped inside the system. That's why I think the Becka engagement might actually be part of something larger. Not necessarily because Becka already knows about Mayday, I don't think she does yet, but because Garth may realize she could become essential to helping Agnes escape. And if that's true, then Episode 8 wasn't just setting up a tragic friendship conflict. It was setting up recruitment, because Becka is actually in a very unique position right now. Unlike Agnes, Becka has already started emotionally pulling away from Gilead's ideology. You can see it in the way she reacts during lessons, in how uncomfortable she looks around discussions of marriage, sex, and duty. There's fear there, yes, but also resistance. Quiet resistance, the kind Gilead often overlooks until it's too late. And unlike some of the other girls, Becka isn't driven by ambition or status. Hulda wanted excitement. Shunammite thrives on competition and superiority. Agnes still desperately wants emotional connection and hope. Becka mostly wants safety, and people like that are often the first ones to recognize how broken systems really are. That's why I think Garth choosing Becka specifically might not be random at all. Because if he truly wanted the easiest path inside Gilead society, there are probably other girls who would make more politically useful wives. But Becka gives him something different: trust, proximity to Agnes, and someone emotionally vulnerable enough to eventually question the system entirely. Now here's where the theory becomes even darker. A lot of viewers are assuming Agnes losing Garth means her story is moving toward emotional isolation. But what if the opposite is happening? What if Agnes losing Garth publicly is actually the only thing keeping her safe? Think about it. Agnes is already becoming dangerous to Gilead in ways she probably doesn't even fully understand yet. She knows what Dr. Grove did. She's beginning to question the morality of the system. She's emotionally drifting away from the fantasy she was raised to believe in. And most importantly, she's connected to people who are already threats to Gilead. That makes her vulnerable, especially to older commanders looking for obedient young wives. Which brings us to Commander MacKenzie. One of the most fascinating things about the Testaments is how it constantly blurs the line between cruelty and care inside Gilead families. Commander MacKenzie is still part of the system. He still benefits from it. He still helped build the world Agnes is trapped in. But the show has repeatedly hinted that his feelings toward Agnes are more genuine than what we usually see from Gilead fathers. Not perfect, not heroic, but real. And that changes things. Because if MacKenzie truly cares about Agnes, even within the twisted logic of Gilead, then there's a possibility he might try protecting her in the only ways the system allows him to, meaning marriage arrangements. And honestly, this theory that he could maneuver Agnes toward Garth instead of someone like Commander Weston suddenly feels very believable. Because Episode 8 spent a lot of time emphasizing just how terrifying these older commanders actually are for the girls. Not in abstract terms anymore. In deeply personal ones, the Dr. Grove storyline completely changes the emotional atmosphere of the show. Suddenly, the threat isn't distant adulthood anymore. It's immediate, real, physical. And if Agnes ends up facing marriage proposals from older, predatory men, then Garth starts looking less like a romantic dream and more like the safest possible option available inside a nightmare system. That's why I think the triangle may eventually evolve into something much more unusual than jealousy. Survival. Because if Agnes marries Garth and Becka becomes involved in helping them escape, then the emotional dynamics between all three characters become incredibly complicated in the best possible way. Agnes would be forced to trust the girl she feels replaced by. Becka would be forced to help the two people she secretly loves in different ways. And Garth would constantly risk exposing himself emotionally and politically every single time he tries protecting them. That's not a normal YA love triangle anymore. That's a pressure cooker. And honestly, it fits the Testaments perfectly, because this show keeps returning to one central idea over and over again. Love inside Gilead is dangerous, not because love itself is forbidden, but because genuine emotional loyalty threatens systems built on obedience. Gilead can control marriages, it can control sex, it can control status, but real emotional connection? That's harder to contain. And I think Episode 8 quietly showed us the beginning of that problem, forming between Agnes, Becka, and Garth. Especially because Becca's feelings toward Agnes are becoming harder to ignore. The show still hasn't fully said everything out loud, but the emotional framing is definitely there. Becka watches Agnes differently than the others do. There's admiration there, yes, but also protectiveness. Fear of losing her. Fear of disappointing her. And if Becka really does love Agnes in some deeper emotional way, then that makes this entire situation even more tragic. Because now Becka isn't just marrying Agnes's love interest. She may be marrying the one person standing between Agnes and destruction, which creates a scenario where jealousy almost becomes irrelevant compared to the bigger danger surrounding all of them. That's why I don't think the Becka-Garth engagement is the final emotional destination of the story. I think it's the mechanism that eventually forces these three characters into the same secret. Mayday. And once that happens, everything changes. Because Agnes right now still believes escape is almost impossible emotionally, even if she's beginning to question Gilead intellectually. She still thinks survival means adapting. But Garth and potentially Becka may slowly become the people who force her to imagine something larger. Leaving, fighting back, choosing herself. That's why this theory actually feels much more emotional than most rebellion theories in the Handmaid's Tale universe. Usually, the resistance storylines focus on politics, espionage, or survival. But this one feels deeply personal. It's about trust and betrayal, and whether love can survive inside systems specifically designed to destroy it. That's also why the idea of Becka helping Agnes escape feels so powerful. Because on paper, Becka should become Agnes's rival. That's the obvious story, the easier story, but the Testaments keeps hinting that these girls are being pushed toward solidarity instead, toward protecting each other, even while Gilead tries turning them into competitors. And honestly, that would make Becka helping Agnes escape one of the most emotionally satisfying twists the show could pull off, especially if Becka understands that helping Agnes survive matters more than her own heartbreak. That kind of sacrifice would completely redefine her character. And it would also explain why the show is spending so much time developing the emotional bond between the girls instead of focusing only on romance. Because the real love story here might not actually be romantic at all. It might be about loyalty, about choosing each other over the system. And if that's where this is heading, then episode the 8th of May end up being remembered as the moment everything quietly started shifting underneath the surface. Not with some giant shocking twist, not with violence, but with emotional repositioning. The pieces moving into place. Garth inside Mayday. Becka emotionally vulnerable. Agnes beginning to wake up. Commander MacKenzie trying to protect Agnes in the only broken ways he understands. All of it suddenly starting to connect. And honestly, that makes the future of this storyline terrifying. Because if these three really do become part of the same escape plan, then the emotional stakes are going to become brutal. Someone will probably have to sacrifice something. Maybe freedom, maybe love, maybe even survival itself, because this universe rarely gives characters happiness without punishment attached to it. But for the first time, I actually think the Testaments may be building towards something the original series almost never allowed itself to fully embrace. Hope, messy hope, dangerous hope, the kind of hope that only exists when people stop surviving alone and start trusting each other instead. And if this theory ends up being true, then the Garth Becka Agnes storyline may become one of the smartest things this show has done so far. Not because it's shocking, but because it quietly transforms what looked like a tragic teenage love triangle into something much bigger. An escape plan hiding inside a heartbreak story.